Why write a book? Well, if you've got some expertise that you feel like you can share in a way that readers can understand and cut through the jargon, we know that our healthcare system is broken. We know that people go in to see their doctors and can be in and out of the office in 10 minutes, even for serious illnesses. One of the things that most people want to do, though, is take care of their health before those things arise and also be able to address those issues when they do arise. So I think that doctors who have something to say and know how to say it should think about writing a book. If it's not overly covered in the market, or if you've got a new approach that you think is something that really can benefit readers, give it a shot. There's nothing to lose, really. At the end of the day, if you write a proposal and a sample chapter and you can't sell it to a publisher, you haven't lost anything.
Today's guest is someone who every aspiring physician author needs to know. Suzanne Staszak-Silva is a senior acquisition editor at Johns Hopkins University Press. She works with top-tier authors to bring life-changing books to everyday readers. So if you're a doctor that has a story to tell or a mission to share, then this episode is the one you've been waiting for. So let's get into it. What is the number one thing that you're looking for when someone comes and pitches a book to you?
Well, the most important first step for any author is to put together a polished proposal. And even before that, coming up with a good topic and knowing who your audience is really primary and essential to being able to position your proposal with the right editor and the right publishing house. So it's a combination of really having the right topic and knowing what audience you're writing for, and then putting together a really good, strong proposal.
Okay, so what comes first, topic or audience?
Well, the topic usually comes first, right? So if you have a subject area that you're passionate about, that you feel like you have a message to share, that's really your first stepping stone towards publishing. And then you're going to want to identify the audience that you're writing for. So whether it's a consumer audience of everyday readers who don't have specialized knowledge of the subject, or if you're writing for other healthcare professionals, or if you're writing for public policy. Some authors are writing textbooks for students at the college level. Others are looking to write gift books. So knowing who your reader is and where they buy books is really important, because there's different channels that publishers tap into to sell those books.
Okay. And so if we're looking at the topic within the health and wellness space, are you looking for topics that are more evergreen, or are you looking for ones that are trending, or what are like the top kind of topics that really do well for you?
Well, so at Johns Hopkins University Press, I work on the health and wellness titles, and this is an exclusive list for general readers. So even though we're an academic press, we have other editors who are working on monographs for academic libraries, other editors who work on professional titles for a professional audience. But my list of health and wellness titles is geared towards a consumer audience of everyday readers. So when I'm looking for a new book or a new project, or if something comes across to me through email or through an agent or directly from an author, I'm always looking for topics that speak to readers out their everyday lives and how they can improve it, whether that is a perennial topic like, say, diabetes, right? There's always new research on diabetes. Or if it's more of a trending topic like the mental health crisis among adolescents. Really, that's not perennial, and that's something that's just fallen off a cliff since COVID. So I am always looking for a combination, anything that is going to be evergreen and that libraries and consumers and bookstores are going to want to keep on their shelves, in addition to any new topic, as long as it's not so cutting edge that it's going to be dated once it hits the bookstore shelves.
Okay, that makes sense. So there needs to be some evergreen component to it. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And so when you are looking at this, do you think the topic, like, for example, a doctor might want to talk about holistic health, which might have a lot of different things? Is that too broad? Or if they go broad like that, do they maybe need to have a twist on it that's really going to grab the reader's attention?
So that's a very good question. And it really depends on the topic. So sometimes like a broad treatment of, say, holistic medicine could be something that would work for a consumer audience. Thinking about your reader, who is this reader? Maybe it's somebody who is unfamiliar with holistic medicine and what it encompasses. So doing a broad brush treatment of something like that could work. On the other hand, something like cancer, which is a huge topic, you can't cover all of it in one book. And by trying to do so, you're writing a book for everyone and no one at all. in the sense that, so if you're somebody with breast cancer and there's a chapter on prostate cancer, you're really not going to be interested in that chapter. And so those books, I always look at those and think, gosh, who's really buying this book? Maybe the libraries will keep it on their shelves, but who's really going to the bookstore looking for a book on this subject or going online to the retailers online? So sometimes broad is okay, depending on the topic. But narrowing it down is actually usually a little bit more useful. There's so much competition out there. So having a new angle or a new aspect of a topic that would be useful to general readers can sometimes really make your book stand out.
Okay. And so once you have your topic nailed down and you say, you know what, I'm going to go a little bit more specific. I'm going to look at that. I need to say, who am I writing this for? And on our pre-call, we were talking about some of the challenges that doctors, when they're writing to only other healthcare providers versus the general public. Can you kind of talk about the two audiences and how they can decide which one is better for them?
Sure. So it's a bit of a fine line, and it depends a little bit on the publishing house. So here at Hopkins, when we think about a professional audience or a professional book, we're looking at the reader itself. Usually professional books at some publishers are defined, the book being about the profession and how to perform the profession or how to excel in an area of the profession. At Hopkins, we define the professional book by the audience. So if a book is written for other doctors, we're calling it a professional title because not everybody who's walking through a bookstore is a doctor, right? So it's not for general readers, it's for doctors exclusively. That makes it a little trickier for Hopkins to market the book because mailing lists and other types of marketing tools that we utilize are more expensive or things that we haven't already purchased. It's just a little harder to tap into that market. Bookstores might not be as interested in a book that's only going to be for doctors. So that can sometimes be a challenge for us. But other publishing houses might be a little bit better at being able to hit that stream and might put it into a trade catalog. For Hopkins and my health and wellness list, we're really looking for those books that are geared towards consumers. That doesn't mean that if you're a doctor or healthcare professional and you're writing for other healthcare professionals, you shouldn't write that book. It just means you need to match it to the right publisher. One of the first steps you can do in order to identify appropriate publishers would be to look up other books that are similar to yours and that are written for the same audience and find out who published them. If you're not working through an agent, go to the publishing website, find out who the editor is for that subject area, and then pitch the editor.
Okay, that makes sense. And so say now I have my topic nailed down. I know I want to do it for the general public. Now I'm like, okay, I found some publishers that I want to propose my idea to. Now is the proposal. How do I set up an effective proposal that's going to grab your attention and make you say, I actually want to dive into this idea?
Well, so every publisher is different, but most proposals have the same elements from publishing house to publishing house. So you want to write a really compelling overview of your book. That's essential. What is the book about? Who is it for? What need is it going to fill for readers? You're going to want to put together your table of contents, and that should be annotated, especially for nonfiction. You want to make sure that you're providing a summary of each chapter. It doesn't have to be very long, but you have to tell the editor who's looking at your proposal what's going to be in each chapter. You're going to want to put together a really good bio of yourself. So if you're a doctor practicing internal medicine and you're writing a book about, aging or aging with diabetes, let's say, you're going to want to put together a bio that reflects your expertise in that area. Hopkins and most academic presses are evidence-based. So you want to make sure that you know your stuff, and having that bio intact with your background, with your title and affiliation, any related publishing that you've done. Even if you haven't published a book, maybe you've written some general interest articles, you're going to want to put that into your bio. Then there's a section on marketing, and this is really important. We want authors who know what the market is. So your audience is essential, but also what other books are available on your topic and how your book differs. So I have authors come to me and say, my book is completely unique and there's nothing else like that. And the truth is that that can't be so. There has to be related material, especially if you're writing an evidence-based book. You probably consulted other books on the subject. And having competition is not a bad thing. It indicates that there's interest in the marketplace. So including those titles that have recently published within the last 5 years or so and how your book differs. Doesn't have to be super long, doesn't have to be 50 books. It could be the top 5 books in the field and how your book compares to those. Then you'll want to put together, and this is really becoming much more important, your platform. Your platform is the stage from which you're able to promote your book. Some people have big platforms, some people don't. Mel Robbins is all over the place right now with her mental health book, and she's got a huge platform. She's got a huge following on Instagram, I'm sure on X, and I'm sure on other social media platforms. If you don't have that kind of social media presence, then highlight some other activities that you could tap into to help promote your book. So if you're on a speaking network, or if you've given a TED Talk, if you have your own podcast, if you have your own website or blog, anything that's going to help bolster your ability to help promote the book. Smaller presses like ours and independent presses don't necessarily need to have a huge platform, but they're going to want to see something. We want to partner with authors who know a little bit about the market and how they're going to tap into that. So that's really important. I'm a stickler for including an estimated word count in your proposal because that's how publishers estimate how long your published book will be. This is not something that's hard and fast. If you say it's going to be 70,000 words and you get a contract and your contract says 70,000 words and you submit 75,000 at the end, it's not the end of the world. But it does help us position and price a book accordingly. So you'll want to project your word count. You'll also want to project your estimated delivery date for your final manuscript. And then you'll want to include a sample chapter. In the past, we've published books on the basis of a proposal without a sample chapter, but more and more we really want to see what the book is going to look like, even if it's just the introduction to the book. So those are the essentials of a good book proposal, but the way you put it together, some authors put in lots of pictures and clips and charts and things of that sort. Those are nice, but don't overdo it. I am a big fan of a polished looking proposal. So, just as long as things are uniform, it's well written, it's been reviewed in the sense that there's not a lot of grammatical errors or typos. And of course, those sneak in here and there. So I'm not going to go crazy about that. But making it look attractive and easy to read is essential. I get tons of proposals every week. If they're sloppy, if they don't include everything, it's really easy to put it on the back burner or to forget about it entirely.
Oh, this is already valuable right there. That's so helpful. Okay. And so you said word count. Is there an ideal word count that you find that does the best?
Well, so for a consumer market, we're hearing more and more from book professionals and book buyers like librarians and national book buyers for bookstore chains that readers really are shying away from books that are more than 300 pages, which is sad. And not, it's not a hard and fast rule. Certainly, there are plenty of books that are longer than 300 pages that people buy. But as kind of a rule of thumb, 300 or less is best. So I'm trying to think, about 85,000 to 90,000, 100,000 words would be the maximum. We do have a minimum of about 50,000 words here. My last publisher also a minimum of about 50,000 words. At 50,000 words with a 6x9 trim, you're looking at a book about 150 pages, 160 pages. So if your topic is intended to be comprehensive and you're submitting 50,000 words and somebody's looking at a book and says, this is 150 pages, how could it be comprehensive? You have to consider that. Some writers will contact me and say, well, how do I know what it's going to be? Well, one way to do that is to put together your outline, your table of contents. If you've got 10 chapters and your first chapter is about 10,000 words, and you know that they're all going to be about 10,000 words, then you can extrapolate from there.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm curious because this has been a big shift now for you, and you've been in the publishing space for a lot of your career. Now with the introduction of a ChatGPT and an AI, how do you think that's going to change becoming an author?
Well, so for one thing, don't have AI write your proposal. I had one author submit 3 different proposals to me in 1 week, and they all had the same format. I mean, it was clearly AI. And you can tell it's fairly easy to spot AI generated proposals these days. He also submitted a complete manuscript, which AI is great for certain things. And Hopkins is actually on the cutting edge in terms of publishers using AI and generative AI. So we want to be using it, but in a responsible and respected way. We don't want books written by AI. We want them written by humans. For a proposal, though, you might run it through an AI to look for typos or to make suggestions for organization or something like that. You don't want the GPT writing your work for you. In fact, this morning I just was speaking with my boss and he was sitting in on a session the other day with some lawyers and some copyright experts, and they were saying that you can't copyright machine-generated material. And that's really important. This is the cutting edge of technology right now. The law will catch up to it eventually, but right now you cannot copyright machine-generated material. So that's something to keep in mind. And if somebody calls you out on it, if you manage to sneak it past somebody, that could create problems down the line. So GPTs are great for a variety of things. I use them in my daily work, for instance, to find peer reviewers. As a university press, everything we do goes through peer review. So I can feed a proposal into a GPT that I actually worked on with our GPT guru, putting together a good prompt to find appropriate reviewers. We actually use the subscription version of ChatGPT, so we're not training. They're not using our materials for training, and that's really important to us. We want to make sure that we're protecting the materials that are being submitted to us. From an author perspective, I'm not quite sure exactly how authors are really utilizing these tools right now, other than the few occasions that I've seen them actually using GPT to write a proposal. Do have a few authors right now who have published books with us in the past, very long books, encyclopedic type books, and we're using GPT prompts to condense those materials into shortened versions that we can then sell with, of course, the author's review and going over every sentence with a fine-tooth comb. Authors could potentially use GPTs to identify markets, to identify other competing titles. What else? Maybe to figure out some new avenues for marketing that they can put into their promotional activities and their platform. But for right now, the biggest caveat is don't let a GPT write your stuff for you. That's a big no-no. And once I spot it, it's like an automatic rejection.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's good for market research, good for ideation, but never should it be actually writing your stuff for you, which makes sense. You're not really the author then if you're just using AI to write it.
Well, one of the things that's helpful for me when I get a proposal and I'm kind of on the fence about it, who is this really for? Who's going to be interested in this? I can run a proposal through a ChatGPT and ask it questions about, who is this really for? Is this really for the professional reader or is this for the consumer reader? And that's been helpful in just determining a little bit more about the market.
Okay. And so say you read the proposal, it's not written by AI. It's got all of the things that you're listing off, right? It has the outline, chapters, marketing, platforms, all that good stuff. And you're like, you know what? Yeah, we would like to work with you. What does that next step look like?
So for us at Hopkins, we are a peer review press. So everything we do goes through peer review. Proposals that don't have a manuscript already written will go out for peer review. And then if we contract that work, the manuscript, once it's finished, will also go out for peer review. Many times we have authors submitting their proposal along with a finished manuscript. They've been working on it for a year or two. They have it done. They don't have it under contract. And that's great because then we just do the peer review process once. We do the proposal and the manuscript at the same time. And that's exactly what it sounds like. It's a peer review. We look for appropriate reviewers, academic reviewers, to go over the material to make sure that it's evidence-based. That's the biggest thing, is that it's evidence-based, that it's accepted by, the general community of scholars who know the topic. That doesn't mean that it should be an academic project. It doesn't mean that it has to be written for other scholars. It just means that if you're an author who's presenting material about, I always go back to diabetes because it's such a common illness, but if you're presenting new information about diabetes medications, you want to make sure that you have the citation apparatus in place to support that. So that's the next step. Once I see a proposal that I like, that I think fits our list, I'll identify the peer reviewers. We solicit those peer reviews. Once those reviews come in, if they're good, if they're generally good overall, I'll put those together into a document to share with the author, and we ask the author to respond to those reviews with any kinds of comments or any revisions or any new directions that they'll take in writing the full manuscript. If the author wants to proceed and I think everything looks good, I bring it to my editorial board. We approve projects by committee. That's true of most publishing houses, even non-academic ones. And then it would then go to a faculty board. So we are, as a university press, we are overseen by a board of faculty members who review every project and basically put the rubber stamp on the final decision if it's to offer a contract or not. That's not the case at trade houses or independent publishers. They don't have a faculty board. So once a book proposal is approved by an editorial board, a contract is usually offered.
Okay. And wow, this is actually really insightful because now I know that if something does have your guys' stamp of approval, it's gone through an intensive process to get to that point, which is
Very
really cool.
intense, very
Yeah.
intense. So we have outside independent peer reviewers, and then it's, overseen by everybody at our table in the editorial division, in the editorial department, plus marketing, sales, publicity, and then the faculty board. And the faculty board are exclusive to Hopkins. They're Hopkins professors.
Okay. And so say you guys both parties agree and you talked about a contract, right? What does that mean? Is a contract broken down? Are they paying you for it? Tell me about the economics. I want to hear about it.
Sure. So contracts vary from publisher to publisher, but they all contain the same basic elements. It's really just a matter of different language, but every contract contains the same grant of rights. So as an author, well, I should say as an editor, I am buying the rights to your intellectual property on behalf of my publisher. And you are granting us those rights. You are granting us the right to publish the book. Publishers exist for a reason. We take on all the risk and all the cost in developing and producing a book. Authors provide us with the material to do that. So, of course, there's the grant of rights. And in the contract, there will be basics. What's the word count? What's the due date? Who is the author? There's a warranty that indemnifies us against if you're plagiarizing, and that's in every publishing contract. And then it outlines things like subsidiary rights, so audio rights or translation rights, motion picture rights, things like that. And it also outlines the financial arrangement. So most publishers have a royalty structure. Hopkins has a royalty structure. We have an escalating scale of royalties. There's a starting royalty rate. Some publishers offer royalties on the list price of a book. That's the price you actually see on the book. So if it says it's $24.95, even if you buy it for $10, you're getting royalties on the list price. That's usually for the big five huge publishers in New York City. Other publishers like Hopkins and my last publisher, which was an independent press, we offer them a net, which is the money we recoup after discounts. So it's the price less the discount.
Okay.
But usually there's a starting royalty rate, then there's an escalator at a certain sales point, and then usually another escalator. Most publishers offer some type of advance. The big publishing houses offer much bigger advances. Smaller publishers and academic publishers offer much smaller advances. Advances are monies that we pay up front that go against your royalties account. So you won't receive royalties on your book until you've basically paid back the advance to your sales on your book, if that makes sense. It's very, very, very standard in the industry. Here at Hopkins, our advances can be as small as $0 if it's an academic monograph. Otherwise, small, $2,000, $2,500. We might go a little higher for a book that we feel really might have huge potential. But mostly we keep advances small because if we don't meet those sales expectations, we lose that money. You get to keep it as an author, but we lose it as a publisher. So that's a big deal.
So I want to clarify there. The advance is a lump sum of money that the publisher is paying to the author or vice versa?
That
Okay.
the publisher pays to the author. Yes, we don't. I mean, there are some presses out there where authors, they're vanity presses. If an author is paying a publisher to publish their book, it's a vanity press. And there are plenty of vanity presses out there. Amazon has a version of this where you're paying to self-publish. I will say that if you can avoid self-publishing, you should. Self-publishing is, it usually signals to an editor that you tried to get your book published, but didn't succeed. And that means you cast a wide net. It doesn't always mean that. Sometimes an author just gets impatient waiting and decides they want to publish a book. And there have been some major success stories with self-published titles. I usually see it, though, as a little bit of a kiss of death. It means either you were too impatient to wait and go through the whole process with a publishing house, or you went to a bunch of publishing houses and nobody wanted it. So, but not always. I've certainly offered contracts for books that were self-published that did well. I lost a book many years ago that I made an offer on to an author who then did go on to self-publish it, and he did very well with it. So that can happen. But when you're coming to a publisher and when you're publishing with a publishing house rather than a vanity press or doing it on your own, you're also getting the marketing, the sales, the publicity, all of the production and proofreading, copy editing costs. All the costs are being taken on by your publisher. Certainly, these self-publishing houses probably provide some level of help in that regard that you probably pay for. I don't know that much about it, to be honest, because like I said, it's one of those things that's like a red flag for me if somebody's submitting a proposal for they self-published.
House and then maybe a vanity press. You're saying with a publishing house, what's going to happen is they're going to sign the contract and the publishing house gets intellectual rights to it. But they will at times give a lump sum to that author where you say, you don't collect any royalties or any proceeds off the book until we get this money back. Is that right?
Through sales. Get that money back through sales. So like your royalties start accruing, but you don't start receiving those royalties until you've accrued the amount that covers your advance. So it's actually called an advance against royalties. That's the technical name of it. Some publishing houses just, if you're like a marquee author, they might just pay you a lump sum that doesn't even take your royalties into account. But that's pretty unusual. So the advance is it's a lump sum. It's often paid in installments. So some publishers do it on publication. Some do it, or I should say Hopkins, typically we do it half on signing of the contract and then half on acceptance into production. So delivery and acceptance is the dual term. That just ensures that, we're not losing the entire advance. If you take the money and then say, I'm not going to, write the book, most contracts stipulate that if the contract is canceled for any reason, an author is responsible for returning that money. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Why do you offer that advance to them when you guys are taking, it seems like, all the risk? They're not paying any money to you at all?
No, not any press I've worked for. But that doesn't mean that there aren't presses out there that do that. There definitely are. But, a more reputable, higher level press is not going to take money from authors. Some presses and some, especially academic presses, will sometimes take what's called a subvention, where an author or an organization they're affiliated with will put some money towards the production of the book. But that's usually for more academic type works or something that's specialized to an organization, that kind of thing. I've never worked in for my trade books, I've never been in a situation where we've asked an author to pay us. I've been in a situation where we haven't offered an advance. We've only offered royalties. But then the royalties start kicking in as soon as sales start to come in. Most publishing houses only pay royalties once or twice a year. So you have to let it accrue. It's not like a bank account where you just keep getting interest every month. You'll get a royalty statement usually once a year, where I've worked, sometimes twice if you're at one of the bigger presses. And then usually it's for the previous year's sales. So that's how we do it here at Hopkins. My last company also did it once a year for the previous year's sales. So no, there's no fee that we're asking you to pay. On occasion, one fee that does come up, we require that authors put together the index for their book themselves. Some authors don't want to do it, so they ask us to arrange for that. In that case, we will often arrange for the index, but charge the cost of that index to the royalties account. So if you've received a $2,000 advance, and then you say, get somebody else to do the index, and that index costs $1,500, then you're looking at a $3,500 charge against your royalties account before royalties will kick in. So that's a fairly common thing. I think in the past here, they might have asked the authors to pay out of gate for the index. I like to just charge it to the royalties. It's a little more seamless. So that's the way we've been handling it recently. Authors accrue some expenses if they have to travel to do research. We don't pay for that kind of thing. Or if they decide they'd like to hire outside publicity. So most publicity departments are very small and focus on a few activities that help to promote a book, especially things like getting book reviews. We know that book reviews sell books, but if you're hoping to get on the Today Show, you're probably going to have to enlist your own publicity team. And that's something that as a press, we don't pay for. Authors are encouraged to do it, but they're not required to. It definitely helps to bring your book to the top of lists. And, but if you're a first-time author or you're somebody who's not writing bestsellers out there, it's going to be really hard to get on the Today Show. But you might get a publicist who can get you onto some very popular podcasts or a radio tour, which you can do from your home. Doing bookstore events are things that authors can set up on their own, really. Just if you have local bookstores, you call the bookstore manager, you say, hey, I'm a local author. Would you like to do a book event? And most bookstore managers are happy to do that, and they know how to do it, so they'll work on it.
So let's break down the ones that, because you've now have published, I'm sure, several books. What are the ones that end up becoming bestsellers versus the ones that end up flopping? Is there a difference between the two?
Well, they become bestsellers if your name is Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. But most books, contrary to popular opinion, most books are not bestsellers. So we need the Stephen Kings of the world and the J.K. Rowlings of the world to basically subsidize mid-list authors. And the mid-list authors are really like the bread and butter of most publishing companies, but they're not usually making the bestseller lists. Bestseller lists are also a bit tricky. And the bestseller lists that are most popular out there don't usually reveal how they determine what's a bestseller and what's not. Typically speaking, a best-selling book is a book that sells 10,000 copies in its first week of sales. That's really, really hard to do unless you work with or other publishing personnel who can arrange for that kind of sale. So the bestseller lists, you just have to take with a grain of salt. Sometimes they're really manipulated. Let's just say that.
Sure.
But to get a really, just from my own experience, books that tend to do better than our sales expectations are usually books that are sort of like hidden topics that you wouldn't necessarily expect to take off. You know, a topic that's never really been covered in a certain way before. So at my last company, one of my best sellers, and it became a bestseller year after year after year after year. It was always one of our top 10 selling books, was a book about how to stop doting on and caring for borderline or narcissistic personality people in your life. It doesn't have to be a romantic partner. It could be a narcissistic mom or a narcissistic coworker. And it wasn't even saying break up with that person. It was just talking about how do you get out of that dynamic and how do you break those habits and patterns. It took off. I mean, it just sold like hotcakes for, whatever reason. And it sold, funny enough, and maybe not so funny, it sold great in ebook because you don't want to be walking around with a book about how to deal with the narcissist in your life with your narcissist right there. Other books are really, if it's a really hot health topic, I deal with health and wellness. So Bestsellers here is now going into its 8th edition called The 36-Hour Day. And it's for caregivers of people who have Alzheimer's or other dementias. So this was written by a dementia care doctor and his nurse who suggested the idea. He used to just put together paperwork for the patients and their caregivers, right? So this is really for caregivers. And it has sold almost 5 million copies across the 7 editions that are out so far. And that's why we keep doing new editions, because there's new material that comes to light every couple of years. So really, it's a combination of hitting the market at the right time with the right topic and an author who's willing to put in a little extra work to promote. So however you can do it, whether it's through social media or organizations that you do talks at, through your alumni networks or other networks that you might have, whether it's a newsletter that you provide as a subscription service, whatever it is, if you're willing to put in that work and have your book rise above the other books on the market, that's usually going to result in a successful title.
That is super helpful. So, what kind of this podcast is for physicians specifically. What kind of doctor, why should they even decide to write a book, or why shouldn't they write a book?
Well, I love working with doctors. They're healthcare professionals in mental health care, and we're doing some functional medicine titles now too. Why write a book? Well, if you've got some expertise that you feel like you can share in a way that readers can understand and cut through the jargon. We know that our healthcare system is broken. We know that people go in to see their doctors and can be in and out of the office in 10 minutes, even for serious illnesses. One of the things that most people want to do, though, is take care of their health before those things arise and also be able to address those issues when they do arise. So I think that doctors who have something to say and know how to say it should think about writing a book. If it's not overly covered in the market, or if you've got a new approach that you think is something that really can benefit readers, give it a shot. There's nothing to lose, really. At the end of the day, if you write a proposal and a sample chapter and you can't sell it to a publisher, you haven't lost anything. Maybe you've even gained some insight into what made your book not do well. Why didn't they sign this book? What is it about my book? So for instance, Hopkins doesn't publish memoirs. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't publish your memoir, but medical memoirs are really, really tough category. Most of them don't get sold. Most of them never get signed. And you're competing with every other medical memoir, online, in the bookstore, anywhere. So memoir is a tricky category. But if you're writing something that's truly, different, even if there's books out there on the topic, maybe you have a better way of telling that story. So don't shy away from a topic just because there's other books on the subject.
Who shouldn't write a book?
Who shouldn't write a book? That's a good question. I wouldn't say that anybody shouldn't write a book. If you've got something to say and you feel like you've got an audience for that, go for it. Just keep in mind that there's other material out there in the market. So keep your feet on the ground, right? Not in the clouds. Your book isn't likely to be a bestseller, but that's okay. Most books aren't. So really serving your readership, I feel like, is really paramount. And the other thing I'll mention too is that public libraries are a huge resource. And because people don't buy books at public libraries, they count them out as book buyers, but they are the biggest customer for most publishers. So browse your bookstore, browse your public library and see what kinds of books are there that maybe aren't in bookstores. So maybe it's a resource, maybe it's a guide that you're thinking about writing for readers who are, aging with X disease, or you're parenting kids with Y disorder. Those are different ways or different angles for getting at a good subject. So I wouldn't say anybody should shy away from writing a book if you feel like you've got a good idea and a direct audience.
I love that message. I was just listening to a podcast where Simon Sinek was talking about how the actual process of going through and developing a book and going in and diving deep into these ideas and finding about how am I going to communicate these ideas, the process itself is an incredibly it's very transforming for the person, And I think what people need to realize is maybe they can go into it, they can dive into it and really just explore deeper into themselves and the way that they're going to share that story with the world. But also, it's what I'm taking away from this is that it's not necessarily you're not going to become really rich from writing a book, but what it can do is it can open up other doors for you down the road. Have you seen that with any of your authors?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's always interesting. I had an author in a book several years ago. It goes way back, and she published her first book with us, and it did well, but it didn't break any records or anything like that. But it did well, and it was reviewed well by the various book review media. And then a few years later, it's a newsletter called Publisher's Lunch. It's through Publishers Marketplace. I saw that my college roommate, who's a literary agent, had just sold her second book to a competing publisher. So I contacted Stacy and I said, Stacy, what's going on? Is she your author now? And she had signed her. So when this author had come to me originally, she did not have an agent. And then my roommate signed her and sold the book to a much bigger trade publishing house and probably got a better advance and probably stronger publicity from that bigger publishing house. I don't know how that second book did, but we were a stepping stone. And I'm okay with that. As a Hopkins editor, look, Johns Hopkins is a powerhouse. It's an international health organization, right? And it's renowned for its reputation. But, we're not publishing New York Times bestsellers here typically. So if an author comes to me and publishes his first or second or third book with us, and then moves on to something bigger where the publicity machine can really get this author out there and sell 1 million copies, that's great. That's what we want, right? That's sort of like England planting its flag here in the United States, and the baby grows up and separates and does well. So that's fine. We want to see authors succeed. We want to see books help people. So, if we're a stepping stone, great. Even better if you stay with us and become a bestseller.
Oh, I love this. And they can go to bigger authors or biggest publishers, but they could also book paid speaking gigs. They can run a course. They can do consulting. There's so many different ways that they can do. And it really starts with this process here. So
yeah, for sure.
I know you got to get run into your kids' lacrosse game, but if someone's listening to this and they say, you know what, I would love to connect and maybe see if potentially my proposal would be a good fit for Johns Hopkins or someone else. What's the best way to find you?
So email is great. You can send most editors on a publisher's website, and you can find me on Hopkins' website. But email is the best way to reach out. Talking on the phone is great, but usually as a first step, we'll talk on the phone, then I'll say, send me your proposal in an email. So I like a query letter in email. If you have the proposal, send it along. Save me from writing another email that says, sure, send the proposal along. You can include the proposal. If I'm not interested, I'll tell you. If I am, then we'll go from there. Queries do not have to be long. A query email can be, hello, I'm so-and-so. I'm writing a book on this subject. Give a couple of lines of summary. I'm attaching my proposal, or would you like to see the proposal, and take it from there. I had a proposal this morning. It was a memoir. And once it's a memoir, I knew that I had to reject it, but that made it easy for me in the query to be able to go back and, apologize, but reject the title and send her to presses that actually publish memoirs.
Okay. Email, and we'll make sure we put that in the show links below, the best way, if you're okay with that.
Definitely.
But regardless, I know that so many people are going to get a ton of value from this conversation. And I just appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me. So thanks so much.
Anytime. You're
awesome.
welcome.
So if you are a healthcare provider that's listening to this, maybe thinking about writing a book, make sure to reach out to her. Or if you have a story to share, make sure to reach out to us at medstorymedia.com/podcasts, and we can share your story for you. All righty. Have a good one. See you in the next one.